I also think it's a useful counterpoint to the narrative that Russian and pro-Russian and even many Western commentators have been repeating over the last several months, which is that this war is leading to an inevitable Russian victory, and the Russians have lost many wars.
Now, Ukraine says its advance into Russia's Kursk region is continuing amid suggestions of prisoner negotiations sparked by the number of young Russian conscripts which have been captured in the incursion. That's the Russian national anthem, but the advancing Ukrainians paint a picture of Russian authority that is far from the military might paraded regularly in Red Square or the darker threats issued to would-be dissidents. So how do dictators, de facto or not, actually hang on to power? That question this year in a report found that global democracy had slipped to its lowest standing yet, with the ongoing rise of media censorship, unfair elections, and curbs on civil protests. And Anne Applebaum, who joins me now, is a journalist and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and author. Her latest book, Autocracy, Inc., argues that the autocrats in the world today are cementing their alliances not through ideals but deals. That's where the ink come in, and it's economic corruption basically that helps tyranny spread. Hello to you, Anne Applebaum.
Hi, nice to speak to you.
No, it's very good to speak to you too. Can we start just talking about what's going on in Ukraine and what seems to have surprised many people, this sort of counterattack into Russian territory by Ukraine? Some people are saying that it's gesture politics rather than military significant. What do you think?
I think it has great military significance. I also think it's a useful counterpoint to the narrative that Russian and pro-Russian and even many Western commentators have been repeating over the last several months, which is that this war is leading to an inevitable Russian victory. And the Russians have lost many wars. They lost the Crimean War. They lost the war against Poland in 1920 as the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union lost the war in Afghanistan. You could go on and on. I think the Ukrainians have been looking for ways to show that this war is winnable in different ways. Obviously, the slog along the front line, this kind of World War I style trench warfare, doesn't really benefit them, but or anybody. And they are demonstrating, both through their occupation of a part of Russia and through the recent attacks in the last 48 hours on Russian airfields, actually all across the country, and through increasing secondary sanctions on Russia that the US and other countries are placing on companies that trade with Russia in China and elsewhere. They're showing that there are a lot of routes to victory, or at least routes to convincing the Russians to respect Ukraine as a real country and to leave. In other words, the war is over when the Russians stop fighting or when they acknowledge that the war can't be won. And there are a lot of different ways to show that, and this incursion into Kursk province is one of them.
You did criticize the New York Times, which published an opinion piece headline, "Putin has victory in his grasp." Do you think that, we in the West are sort of overawed too much by autocrats and don't really see how vulnerable they can be?
We're overawed by them. We tend to believe their descriptions of themselves. Particularly in the case of Russia, one of the things I describe in my book is the degree to which Russian and pro-Russian narratives have sometimes in combination with China, pro-Chinese and Chinese narratives, have really penetrated both our social media, the international media and social media. There's a huge system of both real and online and traditional and social media forms of communication that the autocratic world now uses together We're not, and they use narratives that often have a lot of echo inside our own societies about the strength and stability of dictatorship and the degeneracy and the divisiveness of democracy. And that, of course, appeals to a part of our population too. And we've simply become used to hearing it, and we have become reluctant to question it. So yes, I do think, particularly in the case of Russia, one of the oddities of Russia is that not only do we not know who the next leader of Russia would be if Putin fell under a bus tomorrow, we don't know how that person would be chosen. So in that sense, it's a pretty fragile system. I mean, there's no succession process. It's not clear how power would be transferred. There are cracks showing even now.
I mean, there was a perception when you were working on your book, I think one headline was "The bad guys are winning." Do you think actually things have got a bit better since then?
I mean, I think that this is a contest that we're going to be in for, for the absolute foreseeable future, for the next several decades. And as you said in your introduction at the beginning, it's not a context really of ideologies in that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, these are the countries who work together. They don't share an ideology, but they do share a common disdain for and dislike of the liberal world, the democratic world, however you want to describe it. And they also are beginning to share tactics and strategies to undermine that world. And I think that contest will go on, for a long time. There will be ups and downs, there will be winners and losers, and there will be, different moments. But they now see themselves, this is a group of dictatorships who see themselves as, these are countries who see themselves as absolute rulers, so leaders or parties or elites who do not want any checks and balances on their power, who dislike the language of transparency, of rights, of the rule of law, and they're willing to push back at inside their own countries, because of course that's the language their own oppositions use, but also around the world. And that contest, they, even if most people in London probably don't wake up in the morning thinking about Russia as their enemy or China as their enemy, but there are people in Moscow and Beijing who do wake up in the morning, thinking about how to defeat and undermine liberals, the liberal world and the democratic world. And so the book is an argument to be prepared for it, to understand it, and to and to be able to counter it in whatever form it takes, whether it's economic or informational or military.
And do you see Donald Trump as being part of that club?
Donald Trump is a strange figure because Donald Trump has no ideology or really ideas at all. He's somebody who is in politics for himself. He's interested in himself, his own power, staying in power. He's interested in sometimes in his own money. And of course, the danger with him is that, as was often the case during his presidency, is that he would be a transactional figure. So he would be someone who would be very happy to do some kind of deal with Russia if it were beneficial to him, or a deal with China if it were beneficial to him. He doesn't see himself as the leader of the democratic world. He doesn't see America necessarily as being the leader of democracies or of NATO. He doesn't. The fate of those ideas that the autocrats want to undermine doesn't really concern him. And so he's a very, although it's very hard to predict what he'll do, as I said, because he's so self-focused, he doesn't have it's not like he hasn't, a plan that he works from. The fear and the threat is that he would wind up undermining the Ukrainians and undermining NATO and undermining any efforts that the democratic world made, whether in the informational space or whether in the fight against money laundering and corruption. He would undermine those efforts to push back against what I call Autocracy, Inc.
I wonder if that's one area where you think with the arrival of Kamala Harris, perhaps the balance has tipped against autocrats?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's too early to say. The campaign has just begun. Harris is still enjoying this. I mean, it's really a remarkable honeymoon. The polls tipping in her direction and thousands of people signing up to work on her campaign. I would expect an onslaught of attacks to be coming soon. So I wouldn't talk about anything too soon. I would be careful about talking about this election or any election as a battle between autocracy and democracy, because we're still talking about battles inside the democratic world, and we still have free elections or partially free elections in democratic societies. And remember that the autocratic world doesn't have that. I mean, we're watching what happened in Venezuela a few weeks ago. There was an election. It was very biased. It was very, it was kind of rigged against the opposition. Nevertheless, the opposition won, and we have the specter of the leader of the Venezuelan ruling party refusing to concede. We have to hope that that won't happen in the United States. And we have to assume that doesn't happen in other democracies. So, for the moment, I'd rather assume that America will remain a democracy, and this election will have a democratic outcome.
But see, that in a sense is the problem around Donald Trump, because as we know, he still insists that the last election was stolen from him. He claims that he's really won it, and there seems to be quite a lot of evidence of Trump allies and preparing the ground to claim victory, even if he loses the election, to undermine the democratic process by saying it's unfair and encouraging people not to certify a result which doesn't go his way. I mean, that is, core autocratic behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, so in my view, that's the main reason to vote against him, is because he's somebody who, you can, whatever his policies are, and as I said, they're hard to predict because he's so self-focused. The main reason to vote against him is that or to campaign against him or to worry about him, is that he is somebody who sought to pervert the results of a democratic election, and he could very well do so again. There are people who've been elected. The way the American electoral system works is that each state has its own system, and some of the people who control elections in individual states are themselves elected officials. And yes, there are some examples across the U.S. now of those elected officials being people who believe in the conspiracy of 2020 and who it is feared might be willing to help Trump if he wants to try again to steal the election of 2024. And the fact that we should even be considering this, the fact that that the U.S. has gone that far down the path towards an autocratic leader, or at least somebody who seeks to undermine democracy, is profoundly disturbing. And it's one of the it's one of the reasons why the autocratic narratives that we were talking about at the beginning of the program support Trump.
President Biden told CBS this week that he is, quotes, not confident at all that there'll be a peaceful transition if Trump loses.
I mean, he can't, of course he's not confident. I mean, there wasn't a peaceful transition last time. What is there to indicate that Trump would want there to be a peaceful transition this time? I mean, he is somebody who is psychologically incapable of accepting loss. He's a narcissist who can't believe he could lose, and he is surrounded by some very cynical, very nihilistic people who are interested both in making sure he wins, whether legally or illegally, but who are also interested in provoking and sustaining chaos for their own sake.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the ink side of your writing about the deals, if you like, the mercenary aspects of autocracy. Earlier this week, Trump was interviewed by Elon Musk, at times the richest man in the world. They had considerable technical difficulties, but let's just listen to the tone of it. This is the two of them discussing Trump's the attempted assassination of Trump.
The president of the United States represents America, and I think that is America. That is strength under fire. That's part of the reason why I was excited to endorse you as the president of the United States is that was just incredibly inspiring. But I mean, what was it like for you?
not pleasant. I
It's
have to
not
be honest.
pleasant.
I said there was
Yeah. I
blood. I
mean,
had
being
more
shot is
blood.
not
I didn't
much
know I had.
fun.
I didn't know I had that much blood. The doctors later told me that the ear is a place that is a very bloody place.
Well, it all sounds rather cozy in spite of the subject matter. How do you feel, Anne, about Musk's intervention? Of course, he's come into this election endorsing Donald Trump.
So there are a number of issues here to take apart. I mean, one, obviously, Musk controls the algorithms on one of the most important, it's not the only important forms of social media. And I mean, in the UK, you've seen the results of that in the last few weeks. He has allowed the far right conspiracy theorists, as well as pro-Russian propagandists, some real, some anonymous, back onto the platform. How the algorithm promotes them. They have a huge reach and scope. And so he's shaping the conversation not only in the United States, but really around the world, anywhere that anybody uses Twitter. And that's something that people who use that service should be aware of. The second piece
You're still on it, I think. You haven't come off it.
I'm on it for a number of reasons. One, because I feel I should be there to combat some of those narratives, and also because there's still there's still accounts that aren't there's information that I can find there that I can't find anywhere else, mostly Ukrainian accounts, people who are reporting on from the front line and from Kursk, for example. And so I find it useful to follow those. I don't really read US or UK news there. But I recognize that it's now a service that is dominated by a specific group of users, and they're users who are promoting ideas about chaos, about degeneracy, about democratic decline. Musk himself, during the events in Southport, was talking about their inevitability of civil war. This is a far right, and sometimes historically, of course, it's a far left idea that that we need to increase the amount of chaos and have a breakdown or a catastrophe, and then some new form of politics will come to power, some autocratic politics, or maybe some kind of techno autocracy. I don't really know what he wants, and maybe he doesn't know either. But that's the kind of language that, of course, you also hear from Russian accounts and from other autocratic accounts the world. That's around the world. That's the language of that promotes a sense of decline and despair and nihilism in democracies. I mean, there may also be another aspect of Trump's relationship with Musk. Musk may want, there may be business deals or connections or arrangements that he wants, and that's another, of course, in a way, that's a relationship that's also more typical of the autocratic world, where they're oligarch insiders who support or make money off their relationship to the state, and therefore they have a stake in supporting the leader, whoever he is, remaining in power. You can see that in Russia or Venezuela, or indeed China as well. So it is a very ugly and ominous relationship.
Yeah, Trump said of Xi Jinping and Putin and Kim Jong-un, they're at the top of their game, they're tough, they're smart, they're vicious, and they're going to protect their country. But is what really unites them the fact that, regardless of ideology, they will prop up each other in effectively plundering and looting their country for their own personal gains?
Yeah, one of the big differences between the autocrats of our era compared to those of the past is that these are billionaires. These are very, very rich people, and they have enormous amounts of money at stake. And if not them personally, then their families or business people who are closely connected to them. These are and they in some cases, their economies are set up to make them rich. I mean, so their power and their money are connected, and also what's very important to them is their ability to hide their money. And they use often the Western financial system or Western real estate markets in order to do so. And in that sense, they have a lot of allies in the democratic world who've helped them to steal and hide money or to invest their money. And that's another element of the system that's relatively new.
And do you think that Democrats should be doing more to focus on their, their pursuit of money, maybe with, looking into dirty money and more sanctions, perhaps.
So I would actually look at our own laws, our own, why do we still allow any anonymous companies or anonymous property transactions? Why are those loopholes still in our system? Isn't there a way to stop people from hiding their money in illegal tax havens, or make that, or I mean, sometimes they're legal, maybe they shouldn't be. So I think having a closer, deeper look at our own system, and doing so as a democratic alliance, as the democratic world, so the US and Europe and Luxembourg and Japan and Australia should all be working together to ask, how can we stop our system from being used by money launderers? How can we stop dark money from affecting our own politics, which clearly it does, certainly in the US and the UK, and I suspect elsewhere.